We have a semi-active landslide area here called the Klondike Canyon Landslide, and the fear is that that will become very active if the water saturates. But this water is flowing out of essentially a spring.
This big pipe is just a relic.
It's a relic of other attempts to remove the water. If we had a wet spring and a wet winter, as we had other years, then we'd have water flowing through the canyon on the surface and actually causing some of this erosion that we see out in front of us. The trail, as I mentioned earlier, used to follow this straight line through, and now we have to walk around a little bit this erosion that occurred during mostly the big rain that we had in 2005. So if there are no other questions, we'll get moving back uphill and find ourselves at a viewpoint of the Portuguese Bend area.
You know, and what is an aquifer? Underground water?
It's a collection of water in the strata underground. Here underground happens to be above us, uphill.
Yeah.
But yeah, the water finds a level of permeable rock that's become saturated. Yeah. Okay.
So it's really clean water, isn't it?
Well, it's fresh water. Now, whether it's potable or not, drinkable or not, is left to you. The water here, historically, and continues to be saturated with a lot of minerals, a lot of iron, a lot of calcium. Nothing dangerous in small quantities, but not very comfortable to drink in long term. Although the Indians here use these canyon water sources as their daily water and probably suffered no ill effects that we know of, but it's not something we'd be used to drinking.
So this goes out to the ocean then?
Just straight out to the ocean now, yeah. Okay, let's get going.
Okay.
Now here out in front of us, we have Palos Verdes Drive south, and beyond we have the beach club, the Portuguese Bend Beach Club, and looks like the surf is up. You notice left and right of the sandy area we have kelp growing, and kelp grows only on rock surfaces, and that's the reason why in the sandy area in front of us we don't have kelp. The kelp here on the peninsula degenerated to a point where in the 1970s a group of diving clubs got together to reintroduce the giant kelp on our shore. They went to Catalina and took out spores of kelp and planted them as seedlings in the rock area around the peninsula, and it's been pretty successful. The kelp seemed to die off because of pollution and because the animal we know as the purple sea urchin had eaten all of the holdfasts, the base of the kelp, to a point where the kelp couldn't reproduce. The explosion in the population of the sea urchin is all due because of the lack of predator animals. Here would be the sea otter that was not allowed by federal law south of Point Conception. Now the Fish and Wildlife Service is conducting a survey, or has conducted a survey of the public, asking if the sea otter could have permission again to venture south of Point Conception. And I think probably it'll happen. Here this last winter, there were 2 sea otters spotted off of the Rocky Point area in Palos Verdes Estates by one of our docents, and off of Point Furman in San Pedro. So they're around in small numbers, exploring, and hopefully they'll establish a colony here someplace, and that would be exciting.
So why are they allowing it?
Well, the fishing lobby was very strong before that, and felt that the sea otter was encroaching on their fishing areas, and so to satisfy the fishermen, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal and the state government, outlawed the sea otter from coming south of Point Conception.
Now, the brown area out there is kelp, right? What's brown in
Right,
the
the brown.
ocean is actually kelp.
Right. what we also have this season is a lot of red tide. And yesterday I noticed off of Long Beach there was a lot of red, brownish surface on the ocean, and that's the red tide. Phytoplankton, diatoms that increase their numbers exponentially for one reason or another, and cause a lot of havoc in the food. We heard recently of demonic acid being produced by some of these phytoplankton, and it saturates the food chain and becomes a neurotoxin, and flows through the food chain from small fish to large predators like pelican and sea lions, and they're all affected. Out in front of us again we have to our back is the Portuguese Bend landslide. The Portuguese Bend landslide is the oldest and largest active landslide in the United States, I think. It was active geologically back in time and has always been known as a landslide area, even when the homes were built around here in Portuguese Bend. In 1956, the landslide became active to a point where 134 homes had to be abandoned, and the construction of Crenshaw Boulevard from Crest Road down to the ocean was abandoned. And ever since then, the land has been moving towards the ocean. Some years it moves at a rate of about 16 to 19 feet a year. Right now, after the 2005 rains, it's still quite active, and we find continuous slippage in the road surface down here in Portuguese Bend. The road surface is continually being repaired to a point where the city of Rancho Palos Verdes spends quite a lot of money every year in repair and reconstruction of the road.
They put the pipe overland.
Yes, the two pipes that we see on the seaward side of the road are actually sewer lines, two 12-inch lines that take the place of what would be in other places a below-ground 24-inch sewer main. And in places out here, the gas lines are on the surface and the water lines are on the surface as well. The two homes that we see on the seaward side are called the Cherry Hill homes. Once upon a time, they sat on Cherry Hill Lane that was on the other side of the road. When I was in high school, those two homes were on the inland side of the road. Now the road has moved a lot, and the homes have moved a lot, but in any case, that's an example of the kind of movement that we've had here in the last 50 years. So let's go back toward Klondike Canyon and explore the Upper Canyon a little bit, talk about some geology, and on the way back down here I saw some bentonite sticking out, so we'll talk about the bentonite and the failure mechanism for this large slide. We stopped here because the interesting thing about this slope is it exposes the volcanic ash that we know as bentonite. And the bentonite is the failure mechanism of the Portuguese Bend landslide, the 18th hole landslide, and the Klondike Canyon landslide. And I'd like a volunteer. I have a bottle of water here, and if you would like to pour a little bit on some of this bentonite, some of that, wet it up, and if you would like to come by here and feel this and see how slippery it is. This is clay, essentially, that turns very slippery when it's wet and becomes the failure mechanism for some of these landslides. Now, this is not an evil thing. Bentonite is not evil in the fact that if it's sitting in a flat, perpendicular, horizontal area without any incline at all, it's very harmless. In fact, the clay is used to cap old oil wells, and sometimes it's used commercially in makeup as a mask. So, but if it's sitting at any angle at all and becomes wet, it becomes like a slide, the failure point of this. And put a little water, a little more water on that. And again, you can see you can see how slippery it would be. And it's not that the rock above it slides on this; it's that this rock loses adhesion. It's not cemented together anymore, and so it fails on that plane. So that's bentonite, and here it's exposed. If you were to dig down deep enough and find the bentonite seam, you'd find that it was a different color. It would be a little greener and grayer, but as it weathers and ages, it turns a little lighter in color and creamier in color, with a yellow tinge. So just like some of us. Okay, let's go on. Let's go uphill, and we'll see what else we can find up there. We stopped here to show you a geologic piece of history here. Not only can we find fossils, as these two gentlemen are looking for, but we have in front of us the remnants of a dome. This dome came up on the left side here and plunged down here on my right. The top of it was chopped off, it looks like, by some kind of erosion, probably a beach. And I'm saying it was probably a beach because if you study the rocks deposited on this upper strata, they're all rounded. No sharp edges on that rock, which means it was probably sitting at a beach level with the rocks being banged around and all the sharp edges being taken off, sanded off, broken off, to a point where, like on the beach today, we'd find mostly just rounded rocks. And so this shows us one of the intermediate beach levels. And these beach levels appear all over the peninsula. The rock that we have here, the shale, the Altamira shale, can be broken up, and we'd be lucky sometimes to find fish skeletons in there. We can almost always find fish scales, seaweed, and in fact the hill behind us that we'll explore on the way back to our cars is called Fossil Hill, for the numbers of fossils that have been taken from there. And if you'd like to work just a little bit, I guarantee that everybody would go home with a fossil. At least a fish scale or two, perhaps even a shark's tooth. But we have to get down and at ground level and take a look. So
Is it okay to take those things?
yeah, you can take a souvenir or two. I wouldn't fill a backpack up, but then you wouldn't be able to walk with it either, so not worried. So let's take a look. One of the interesting rocks that we do see here, besides the Altamira shale, is a contact metamorphosed rock here known as Chert, C-H-E-R-T. And this used to be the same kind of rock as we see here, the softer Altamira shale. But what happened here was that there was an intrusion of volcanic molten rock, magma, that came very close to this area, so close that in some places made contact with the shale and cooked it, fired it, changed its structure to a point where it recrystallized. And recrystallized to a point in some places because of the amount of silica in the rock, recrystallized to a point where when it breaks, it creates a very sharp edge. And the native Indians here, the Tongva and the Chumash, looked for this kind of rock to make their spear points and arrowheads, because it broke, it shattered, it fractured on those lines that made very good spear points and arrowheads. So it's called Chert. And all it is basically cooked shale, recrystallized shale. Okay, so if there are any volunteers to find any fossils here, you're welcome to look. But let's gather ourselves up and head off to Fossil Hill. We stopped here again to catch our breath going up to Fossil Hill. And to point out one of the native plants again, this is the prickly pear cactus. If you notice, the prickly pear cactus this season is rather withered, and again, that's a function of the drought. On the trail leading up here, we saw some erosion, and in these erosion fields, we see that a little bit of cactus